It started, like most HOA horror stories do, with a letter. A single sheet of paper folded neatly inside a plain white envelope, stamped with the logo of the Homeowners Association, elegant, sterile, and cold. The kind of letter that pretends to be polite while holding a knife behind its back. It was the first week of December, the time of year when the entire town began to shimmer with soft light and music. Every house along the cul-de-sac was already trimmed with garlands and glowing icicles. The air smelled like pine and sugar cookies, and for a moment, it actually felt like the holidays. Then came that letter. It wasn't unexpected, not exactly. The HOA in this neighborhood had a reputation, one of those associations that liked to believe it controlled everything from grass height to the shade of white on your mailbox post. But this time, their target wasn't weeds, paint, or a fence. It was Christmas. According to the notice, my excessive holiday display violated 3 different community guidelines. One for unauthorized decorative structures, another for improper use of outdoor lighting, and a final one for disturbance of neighborhood peace. In other words, they thought my lights were too bright, that I had only put up a few thousand LED bulbs across the roofline and hedges. Nothing out of the ordinary for someone who loved the holidays. I'd been decorating like this for years without issue. But this year, there was a new HOA president. A woman named Patricia Reynolds, the kind of person who seemed to treat the HOA handbook like the Bible and herself as its prophet. Patricia had moved in last spring and quickly made herself known. She introduced new clarifications to the rules, enforced old ones that everyone had long ignored, and started handing out fines like they were Christmas cards. She wasn't technically wrong about most of the violations she cited, but she enforced them selectively, and she enjoyed the power that came with it.so. When I saw that letter, I didn't just feel annoyed. I felt challenged that I tried to ignore it at first. I thought maybe if I just toned it down a little, maybe took off the animated reindeer or the synchronized music, they'd back off. But within 2 days, another letter came. This one less friendly. A final warning. According to Patricia, I had until December 10th to remove the excessive display or face daily fines until compliance. It wasn't just the lights, she wrote. It was the spirit. Apparently, flashing multicolor bulbs and loud festive music were not in keeping with the peaceful, uniform aesthetic of the neighborhood. That line stayed in my head all day. Peaceful. Uniform. As if joy had no place here. I spent that weekend walking through the neighborhood, just observing. Most houses were modestly decorated. A few strands of white lights, a wreath or two, maybe an inflatable snowman if someone was feeling bold. And it hit me. This wasn't just about rules. Patricia didn't like that my house stood out. She wanted control, and my enthusiasm was a threat to her authority. That realization lit a fuse in me. I started reading the HOA bylaws, really reading them, line by line, section by section. It was painfully dull, but I was searching for something, a loophole, a gray area, anything they might have overlooked. And I found it. Buried in Section 9, under Community Holiday Guidelines, was a clause stating that seasonal decorations are permitted provided they do not cause permanent damage to property or obstruct road visibility. Nothing about brightness. Nothing about the number of lights. Nothing about timing or color. Just no obstruction. So technically, they couldn't stop me. That night, I made a decision that I wasn't just going to keep my lights up. I was going to make them bigger, brighter, bolder. The kind of display you could see from the next zip code. I started sketching out designs, calling in favors from friends, ordering extra lights online, industrial-grade LEDs, programmable strips, motion sensors, projection lights, everything. I stayed up late, mapping the roof, the yard, the trees. Every inch would glow. The following week, I began installing everything under the cover of early evenings, after work. The neighbors would wave or stop by, curious about what I was doing. Some laughed, some shook their heads, and a few whispered that I was asking for trouble. Maybe I was. But I wasn't doing this just for me anymore. Every person in that neighborhood had a story about Patricia and her petty rules. A garden she made someone remove because it was too wild. A swing set she ordered dismantled because it was unapproved. A kid's basketball hoop banned for aesthetic inconsistency. People were tired of her, but no one wanted to fight. I didn't blame them. The HOA had real power here. Fines, liens, legal threats. But I wasn't breaking the rules. I was using them. When the lights finally went up, The house looked like a beacon in the dark. Thousands of tiny bulbs, cascading in synchronized waves of color. The music, soft at first, matched the rhythm of the lights, a symphony of carols and cheer that could make even the grumpiest neighbor smile. For 2 nights, everything was peaceful. Cars drove by slowly to admire it. Kids laughed. People stopped to take photos. For a moment, it felt like community again. Then came Patricia. Late on the third night, I noticed a figure standing at the edge of my driveway, clipboard in hand, flashlight aimed directly at my front lawn. She was taking pictures, muttering into her phone. Her expression was pure fury. By morning, another letter appeared. This one wasn't a warning. It was a fine, $200 for a violation of community aesthetics and failure to comply with prior directives. The tone was harsher, more personal. She accused me of willful disregard for HOA authority and threatened legal escalation, but I had already prepared my response. I mailed her a copy of the HOA's own rulebook with the section on holiday decorations highlighted, along with a note that said simply, "Compliant." 2 days later, she called an emergency HOA meeting. Word spread fast. Everyone was invited, but only a handful showed up, mostly the same board members who always backed her decisions that I didn't attend. I didn't need to. The lights spoke for themselves. Still, I knew this wasn't over. Patricia wasn't the type to back down easily. And as I watched the glow of my house reflected in the frosty night air, I couldn't help but wonder just how far she'd go to prove a point. Because for me, this had become more than a holiday display. It was a statement, a challenge, and I had no intention of losing. The next week arrived like a cold wind, sharp, tense, and expectant. The lights continued to glow each night, and with every flicker, every shimmer, the neighborhood seemed to divide. Half of them loved it. The other half, led by Patricia and her loyal board members, wanted it gone. Cars began lining the street to watch the show. It started small, a few curious onlookers from nearby blocks. But soon, people were coming from other neighborhoods just to see the spectacle. My once quiet cul-de-sac turned into a nightly parade of headlights, laughter, and music. The sound of car doors closing and kids shouting "wow" became part of the rhythm of December. For most, it was harmless fun. For Patricia, it was chaos. Every evening, she would patrol the street in her heavy winter coat, clutching her clipboard like a weapon. She took pictures of parked cars, wrote down license plates, and muttered complaints about traffic obstruction and safety hazards. Sometimes she'd wave her flashlight at cars, telling them to move along, as if she were directing traffic. That IT didn't help that the local paper caught wind of the story. That a small article appeared one morning with the headline, "HOA cracks down on Christmas cheer." The reporter had heard about the dispute through a neighbor's Facebook post. The story described a dedicated homeowner standing up against a strict HOA over a light display. They didn't name names, but everyone knew exactly who it was about. Patricia was furious. The HOA board held another emergency meeting, and this time, I attended. The meeting took place in the community clubhouse, a beige, sterile building with folding chairs and stale coffee. The air was thick with tension. Patricia sat at the head of the table, posture rigid, smile thin. The other board members looked tired, like they'd been dragged there reluctantly. The meeting wasn't a discussion, it was a performance. Patricia read off complaints, citing noise disturbance, safety risks, and even environmental concerns. She claimed the light display could interfere with local wildlife patterns, a stretch, even for her. I sat there, listening, waiting for my turn to speak. When I finally did, I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply read aloud the same section of the bylaws she had chosen to ignore. Decorations were permitted unless they caused property damage or blocked visibility. Neither applied. The board members exchanged looks. A few nodded slightly. Patricia's composure cracked, just a little. When she realized she couldn't win through rules, she turned to strategy. That weekend, I found orange cones placed along the street in front of my house, marked "No Parking, Temporary Safety Zone." They weren't official city cones, but they bore the HOA logo. She had unilaterally declared the area off-limits to prevent cars from stopping. I quietly moved them to the curb. By the next evening, they were back again. This became a nightly ritual, a silent tug-of-war between us. Then came the power stunt point one night. Right after sunset, I flipped the switch for the light show, and nothing happened. The yard stayed dark. No flicker, no music, nothing. I checked every plug, every timer, every connection. That's when I saw it. The HOA maintenance crew had installed a new electrical safety box near the shared utility pole. My power line had been temporarily disconnected for inspection. That was the final straw that I called the city utility department first thing in the morning. After a few hours on hold and a visit from a technician, the truth came out. There had been no safety inspection. The HOA had filed a false maintenance request. Patricia had used her position to request a shutdown, claiming overload concerns. The technician restored power immediately and filed an official report. The city was not amused. Neither was I. That night, the lights came back on, brighter than ever. I added new sequences, more colors, and a special feature. A massive digital sign that read, "Merry Christmas," from the HOA. It scrolled cheerfully, flashing above the garage like a billboard. The neighborhood loved it. The laughter returned. People honked and waved, and kids danced on the sidewalk. What had started as a petty dispute was now a full-blown community event. Even the local news came out for a short segment. A reporter interviewed a few neighbors, all of whom praised the display. "It brings joy," one elderly couple said. "It's been a tough year. We needed this." The clip aired that evening. Patricia's face when she saw the news crew on our street was something I'll never forget. Tight-lipped, pale, and furious. But she still wasn't done. The next day, I received a certified letter from the HOA's lawyer. It claimed that my light display violated community peace and created hazardous conditions. They threatened to pursue legal action if I didn't take it down within 72 hours. 72 hours that I could have folded then. Most people would have. But something inside me had shifted. This wasn't just about Christmas lights anymore. It was about control, about whether one person's obsession with power could silence an entire community's joy. That I filed my own complaint with the city. I sent them every letter, every photo, every instance of harassment. I attached the false maintenance report and a copy of the bylaws. Then, I waited. 2 days later, the city's community affairs office called. They wanted to visit, not to shut me down, but to recognize me. Apparently, my display had drawn so much attention that it was being nominated for the city's Best Neighborhood Light Show award. The irony was delicious. When the city inspectors arrived, Patricia tried to interfere. She followed them around, pointing at the wires, muttering about safety risks. The inspectors listened politely, then told her everything was up to code and within city regulations. That evening, I turned the lights on again, and this time, the crowd was even bigger. Someone brought hot chocolate, another neighbor handed out candy canes, and a few kids started singing carols on the sidewalk. It wasn't just my display anymore. It was everyone's. From my front porch, I watched Patricia standing across the street, her clipboard hanging limply at her side, eyes narrowed as the lights danced across her face. For the first time, she looked small, not the untouchable authority she tried to be, but just a person who'd lost control of something she thought she owned. The city would make its decision in a few days. Until then, I planned to keep the lights shining. For every person she'd ever bullied with those pointless rules, the battle wasn't over yet. But the tide had turned, and deep down, I knew that the real revenge, the sweetest kind, was still to come. By the time the third week of December rolled around, the entire neighborhood had changed. What started as a single house defying an overbearing HOA had turned into something bigger, a quiet rebellion wrapped in tinsel and light. Every night, more homes joined in. First, it was just a few strings of lights on the next-door house. Then another neighbor added a wreath and glowing candy canes. Within days, nearly every home on the street had some form of decoration. It was subtle at first, as though they were testing how far they could push Patricia's patience. But when no one received any warning letters, the decorations multiplied. One by one, rooftops lit up, driveways sparkled, and lawns shimmered with reindeer and snowflakes. What used to be a gray, uniform neighborhood became a glowing strip of color, a living, breathing festival of defiance. Patricia couldn't keep up. Her clipboard disappeared after the third night of her frantic patrols. The other board members stopped responding to her late-night emails and refused to join her inspection rounds. The authority she'd built over the past year was cracking under the weight of twinkling lights. Still, she tried. The morning before Christmas Eve, she delivered one final notice to every decorated house. A formal warning citing mass noncompliance with community standards. It was a last attempt to reclaim control. The paper was thick, the language stern, the tone almost desperate. But no one took it seriously anymore. That night, something extraordinary happened. Around 7 in the evening, as the lights began to turn on across the neighborhood, people started gathering outside. At first, it was just a few families, bundled in scarves and gloves, holding cups of cocoa. Then more arrived. Someone brought a speaker playing soft holiday music. A few kids began handing out cookies. Neighbors who'd barely spoken all year were suddenly standing side by side, laughing and taking photos. The air buzzed with energy, not from the lights, but from something deeper. Unity. When I turned on my full display, the crowd cheered. The synchronized show played through every bulb, every flicker, every beat of the music. It wasn't just a decoration anymore. It was a message that community spirit couldn't be policed, that joy couldn't be fined. Then, just as the show reached its peak, a pair of official-looking cars pulled onto the street. The HOA board, followed by Patricia. She stepped out, wearing her usual immaculate coat, her posture tight, her jaw clenched. But as she looked around, she saw something she hadn't expected. Not one house in darkness, not one neighbor looking ashamed. Every face was glowing, every home alive with light. Patricia froze in the middle of the street. The soft snow began to fall around her, glimmering in the light. For once, her clipboard was gone. She just stood there, powerless, surrounded by everything she'd tried to suppress. And then, the city officials arrived. They were from the Community Affairs Office, the same department that had inspected my display earlier. They'd chosen this night to make their announcement. A hush spread through the crowd as one of them stepped forward, holding a plaque wrapped in silver paper. The official smiled, turned to face me, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. The city had officially awarded our neighborhood the Best Holiday Spirit Award for the year. The cheer that followed was deafening. Neighbors clapped, car horns honked, and kids jumped up and down. The lights reflected off every smiling face, casting the entire street in a warm, golden glow. Patricia's expression was unreadable, a mix of disbelief and humiliation. She turned sharply, muttered something to the nearest board member, and retreated to her car without another word. The tires crunched softly on the snow as she drove away, the sound fading beneath the laughter and music. For the rest of the night, the celebration continued. Someone lit a small bonfire in their driveway, and people gathered around to stay warm. Music played, children sang, and every window in the neighborhood shimmered with color. For once, there were no rules, no warnings, no fear of fines. Just a street full of people rediscovering what it meant to be neighbors. Later, when the crowd began to thin and the night grew quieter, I stood alone for a moment at the edge of the driveway. The snow was still falling, soft and steady, blanketing everything in white. The lights reflected off it like stars scattered across the ground, and I thought about how it had started, with one letter, one attempt to control something harmless. And I thought about how that single spark of defiance had turned into a fire that brought everyone together. In a way, Patricia had helped create the very thing she'd tried to destroy. Without her, the neighborhood might have stayed quiet, cold, and disconnected. It took her heavy-handedness to remind everyone that rules shouldn't exist just to suppress happiness. That a few weeks later, the city posted photos of our street on their website. They called it the Miracle on Maple Grove. The story spread far beyond the neighborhood, shared on social media and local news channels. Strangers drove through just to see it in person. The HOA never pursued legal action. The fines were quietly retracted. At the next annual meeting, Patricia stepped down as president. Officially, it was for personal reasons. Unofficially, everyone knew she'd lost her grip. The new board members were more reasonable, people who believed in community over control. They even amended the decoration policy to encourage expressive displays of seasonal joy. Every December after that, the lights came back. Different designs each year, but the same feeling, the same spark of rebellion and unity. And every time I flipped that first switch, I remembered how it began, with a letter meant to dim the lights, and how instead, it lit up everything. In the end, it wasn't just a victory against an HOA. It was a reminder that joy is contagious, that a single act of defiance can ignite an entire community, and that sometimes the brightest lights come from the darkest beginnings. As the final night of the season approached, I turned off the display for the last time that year. The street went dark, except for the soft glow of porch lights and the faint glimmer of snow. But even without the decorations, the warmth remained, not in bulbs or wires, but in the people. Because once you've seen a neighborhood come alive like that, you realize that true light doesn't come from electricity. It comes from connection, from courage, from the refusal to let someone else define your joy. And as I watched the quiet snow settle, I smiled to myself, knowing one thing for sure: you can ban the lights, but you can't stop them from shining.